Settle down, brother. This is the Quarter Report powered by ENCA.com. South Africa is a movie. Welcome to the watch party. Controversial hot take. South Africans don't know South Africa. South Africans don't even, by and large, know enough about recent and old South African history to meaningfully understand what is going on in South Africa today. That is not our fault. I include myself in this. But South Africa is a country so deeply defined by its history, its recent history, and its older histories, but even in the last 200 years is so impactful and still affects so much of what South Africa is and what happens here. And I constantly worry that, myself included, but the vast majority, I'm going to say 99% of South Africans, we don't know enough about things that matter and have consequences for our lives. I was on Trevor Noah's podcast a month or two ago, and we were talking about how so many South Africans don't even know what the TRC is, in spite of the fact that that commission and the decisions around that commission have impacted all of us and what modern South Africa is. So today's episode is going to be a little different. We're going to talk about some of the things that we are personally very saddened and outraged that more South Africans don't know more about. And we're not blaming South Africans for not knowing those things. What we are upset about is the fact that our history syllabus, our education system, and general, leaders in South African life have not done a good enough job of making sure we South Africans know what we need to know to understand our history so that we can properly understand the country that we're living in today. And so that is what today's show is going to be about. And I encourage you to get on the WhatsApp line 0607613436, get into the comment sections wherever you're watching this to tell us other things that we're not going to mention that you think more South Africans need to know about to properly understand what is going on in the country. And I mean all kinds of things. We're going to talk about all the things that happened during apartheid that really affect all of us beyond the headlines of what happened during apartheid. We're going to talk about CODESA and whether or not Mandela sold out. We're going to talk about the TRC. We're going to talk about I've spoken about white economic empowerment before. We don't need to do that so much. You can go back and watch the episodes that we've done on those. But we're going to talk about what the Brits did, what the British did. My people did such a good job of outsourcing blame for apartheid and racial inequality and injustice in this country onto Afrikaners, when my people historically did so much evil, not just to people of color, but to Afrikaners, including concentration camps that they put mainly Afrikaners, but also South Africans of color into. We're going to talk about all of these kinds of things and why we feel like they matter so much and why more South Africans need to know about them if we as a country and people living now are going to properly work through national dialogue, but it's not costing you 700 million to watch this episode, work through and understand. As always, full episode is on ENCA.com for you to watch. Go click the link in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. And also, it is payday. What a great day to go and get some merch from 3beaniesnetwork.com. The link is also in the description. Let's talk about how South Africans don't know South Africa. We don't know enough about South Africa. And I'm talking about the facts of what South Africa is like in the modern day. We did that episode last week, I think it was Friday, about the true state of immigration in this country, both legal and illegal is an easy example. But what we're going to focus on is some parts of our history that even if they're 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 200 years old, really still matter because they still affect the fundamental South Africa that exists, that we live in, that we try to thrive in, survive in, and move through. Let's just start with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because this is where this thought really blossomed for me on Trevor Noah's pod, and then the video that I put on social media earlier this week. So many South Africans have no idea about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, particularly under the age of 25, but even older South Africans. And the Truth and Reconciliation Commission fundamentally designed and manifested the new South Africa after apartheid. After the election and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was the next most consequential thing for what made modern South Africa. Spark Notes, again, if you're under 25, you don't even know what that means. If you're over 35, Cliff Notes. If you're under 25, ChatGPT summary, but actually real facts, and you don't have to check them. But the Spark Notes summary is that at the end of apartheid, there was this real crisis in that many millions of the vast majority of South Africans did not know the full extent of what happened during apartheid, what the apartheid government did, the horrors and atrocities that the apartheid government committed. And in the early 90s, at the end of apartheid, the apartheid government destroyed masses and masses of documents that had recorded the atrocities that the apartheid government had committed upon mainly people of color in South Africa. They destroyed the evidence. And of course, it feels obvious to point out, but in that era, before everyone had a phone and it was easy to get data and you could shoot video and pictures on your phone and you could WhatsApp and text and it wasn't just landline. In that era, once something had happened, if the only evidence of that horror atrocity happening was a document and that document was destroyed, that history was gone, except in the minds of people who either suffered those atrocities or committed those atrocities. But how would you get the people who committed those atrocities to come forward and tell you what they did? They wouldn't want to do that. And there was this bind because at the end of it, well, at the beginning of the new South Africa, there was a justified desire to hold people who committed atrocities during apartheid to account and make them face accountability, consequences, and justice. But if we didn't know the full scale of the horrors that were committed during apartheid, how could we even start to come to terms with and get closure over what happened? There were families, millions and millions of people in South Africa who did not know what had happened to their loved ones. Those loved ones had just disappeared one day and never came back, did not know the full horrors that had been committed on people in their communities. And the Truth and Reconciliation, led by Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop at the time, was a project to say the most important thing that we can achieve is to find out what happened so we could truly understand what the apartheid state did to South Africa and South Africans. And from that, we can get a degree of closure, but we could also learn what happened and use that information to properly try to create policies to redress those wrongs, those evils, those injustices. His argument and their argument was, if we don't know what happened, then we won't be able to correct it. We won't be able to effectively fix some of those problems. And his point was, even if that means, because here's the rub, right? Because you're still wondering, if you don't know about the TRC, how are they going to convince people who commit atrocities to come forward? Well, the TRC strategy was, if someone comes forward and admits that they committed a horror, and the commission gauged that that person had spoken honestly, worked with the commission to provide as much information as they had, and showed genuine remorse, contrition, like a genuine expression of regret that they wish they had not done those things and they recognized they were wrong, then those people would be given amnesty from those crimes. They would never be persecuted, charged, pursued by a court of law or a justice system about those crimes. Desmond Tutu and the TRC supporters argued granting that amnesty was justified in two ways. One, if those people never came forward and told us what they did, very few of them would be prosecuted anyway, so they would not face justice in a court of law anyway. And so getting them to come and tell us was better than them just never telling us and still not being prosecuted. But two, the value was that we would find out and we would know the full extent of the horrors that happened and understand how apartheid worked to destroy so many millions of people's lives. Many people disagreed with the TRC and many people believed that they should not have done that and it was wrong. And the TRC did not effectively allow Black South Africans and South Africans of color to express their outrage and get justice through whatever prosecutions could have been possible with the public information that was had at the time to at least put some people behind bars. But the South African government of Nelson Mandela got behind the commission and the commission took place. And huge amounts of information was gathered. Many people did come forward and testify about the horrors that they'd committed, or at least that they were aware of, and that provided us evidence to understand what apartheid had really done. And many people then got amnesty. Many people showed contrition. Some families, some relatives of those victims of apartheid atrocities did feel a sense of closure and were happy that the TRC had done what it had done. But some families, famously Steve Biko's family, were not happy about the TRC and still tried to pursue court like justice mechanisms against the perpetrators who had committed atrocities against their loved ones or upon their loved ones. And the TRC was this wild deal. This deal that was struck where South Africa's government decided that we would make this deal and forgive and try to rebuild South Africa and try to make people come together and feel some sense of closure and reckoning and understanding and hopefully heal some wounds to a degree between different race groups. That was the deal that they struck. And that deal is incredibly consequential to what South Africa has become, because the alternatives would have been mass trials to try and convict some people with what limited evidence one could get one's hands of. And that would have created a different South Africa. It would have created a different vibe. It would have created a different sense of how to rebuild the country. It would have exacerbated divisions. And the TRC probably also exacerbated some divisions because we found out more about what apartheid did to people and what people in the apartheid state did to people. It's important not to talk about apartheid as this other thing. People did apartheid. But the TRC did something that created modern South African life. Another alternative at the end of apartheid could have been to take land back from white people. It could have been to mass redistribute wealth, like kinds of economic justice ideas. And there was a component of economic justice within the TRC, the idea being that some families, relations of victims deserved and would get financial compensation for what had been discovered, had been done to their loved ones and their families during apartheid. So it was built in. But the TRC tried to do this unity, forgive, don't forget, remember better, learn more, unity thing that really shaped what modern South Africa then became. That allowed for things like the Rainbow Nation. That allowed for things like the idea of this miracle state and this miracle people who were able to forgive and overcome. And we are still living in the consequences of that time, because more and more now, there are more and more South Africans who go, but the TRC didn't do enough. And because we did the TRC, we did not pursue other means of more effective justice that would have more radically changed the country to help more Black South Africans who are still impoverished and disenfranchised and disempowered. Not literally disenfranchised, obviously everyone has the vote, but meaningfully in normal life, stripped of power. So we have to know about the TRC, people. If we don't know about the TRC, we can't engage in modern South African life. And the vast majority of South Africans don't know about the TRC. You can feel, I'm sure you can hear the heartburn in my voice about this. And there are currently massive scandals, or they should be massive, around the TRC. A lot of people who were not granted amnesty were supposed to then face charges and investigations from the National Prosecuting Authority, apartheid perpetrators. They were not given amnesty, so they were supposed to face investigations and trials, and they have not been pursued by the NPA. They've not been pursued by the ANC-led justice departments. And there's a whole scandal going on right now with the Craddock Four, who you should know about, and many people don't, to try and force an inquiry into why the Mbeki government and the Mbeki assembled NPA did not pursue people who did not get amnesty. But if you don't know about the TRC, how are you going to know why that story matters? And so, of course, that story is not very big in South Africa right now. It should be. There are also many people who are supposed to get financial compensation from the TRC, get that kind of economic justice, and they did, and they have not got it, and they are still fighting for it. But again, that doesn't make massive news because South Africans don't remember or don't know the significance of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the fact that we don't know is stopping justice, because it means that politicians don't feel pressure from the public to do the right thing and pursue those cases and make sure that those investigations happen. This is, for me, a perfect example of why we South Africans don't know South Africa well enough and need to aggressively learn up, like limber up with knowledge, so we can better understand the true dynamics that create our daily lives